There's a recent poll that came out that Democrats are furious with their party. And so why shouldn't we elect more people who actually represent their values, like Malat Kiros, like Zoran Mamdani, like Claire Valdez, like all of these DSA candidates who continue to win? We're excited to give Oliver Larkin that win as well. I'd love to welcome to the stream Oliver. Hey, Oliver, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mason. How are you?
Doing fantastic. I'm excited to have you on. I know we've been trying to schedule this, but you're a busy man. You've been making the rounds in a lot of different places, and I think that's really cool to see.
Yeah. We were waking up this morning, drove over to Naples on the Gulf Coast. SEIU 1199 healthcare workers are in bargaining right now with HCA Healthcare, the largest private for-profit hospital corporation in the world. So they invited me over on their lunch break to give them a pep talk and talk about having a union organizer running for Congress. So we popped over there, popped back here, and we are burning the midnight oil to raise as much money as we can before this deadline ends in 13 minutes. So really appreciate you having me on for this final push.
No way. Wait, I'm actually honored that I get to be part of the last 13 of this fundraiser push. Everybody make sure to go donate. I know a lot of you have been giving me subs, and I really appreciate that. But if you can donate, go donate to an actual DSA candidate who wants to make change happen in this country. More Talk has pinned that link. You can go ahead and act blue. Just $5. If all of us do that, let's go ahead and push this through the finish line. I want you to talk a little bit more about that union background. There seems to be this misconception that to win in politics, you have to be a consultant or you have to work in the private sector and in these large for-profit industries. Can you talk a bit about what it means to collectively bargain and build union power, and then how that translates to being a good representative?
Yeah, I mean, my interest in trade unions and really seeing the need for trade unions dates back to when I was in college. I was a college football player, and when I was in school, the Northwestern University football team tried to unionize, organizing the first college football players union. When we think about the college industry of college sports, March Madness, college football playoffs, you've got administrators, advertisers, coaches making millions and millions of dollars. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet the people that are actually doing the work, doing the labor, I mean, they can't get paid the same way that you can get paid sitting behind a desk in a computer lab on a work study job. And then after my college football season, my senior year was over. I was a defensive end, by the way, hand in the dirt, number 54 for the Sewanee Tigers in Sewanee, Tennessee. But I went to work as a line cook for the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, and working over a hot grill, working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. It just struck me as something that's not right. I heard Bernie Sanders talking about $15 an hour, so I went to New Hampshire to volunteer for the campaign, got on his paid staff, and through that campaign, what actually came out of that was a formation of a union called the Campaign Workers Guild that I was proud to be an original signatory on the letter, to hold the Democratic Party accountable to the workers, the young people that do the labor of organizing communities, working, again, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, nonstop, tireless, thankless work. Oftentimes there's no HR in these jobs. The person who you should be reporting abuses to may be the person that's harassing you on the job or is overworking you. And after that campaign was over, I went to the marketing agency, the digital advertising agency that the Sanders campaign used, working with progressive nonprofits and labor unions and organizations. And I helped organize that workplace with the News Guild Communication Workers of America. We were among the first to organize a union in the 2018 campaign cycle that now led to the Bernie 2020 campaign being unionized, the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign being unionized, the DNC, the DCCC. And this is the labor movement is really one that I think is central to rebuilding the American middle class and making the American dream accessible for everybody. When we talk about the fact that you have non-compete clauses, that if you are working in a particular industry, you can't go work for a competing job in that industry because of a non-compete clause. That suppresses wages. It keeps wages low. When we talk about the fact that we have at-will employment, that you can be laid off by your boss at a moment's notice, at a moment where we have AI, and I spent 2 years training the AI that led to my job being redundant at the end of 2024. So I know firsthand what the struggles of growing up and working in this economy is like. It's incredibly precarious, and I think far too often Democrats, the conversation begins and ends with the PRO Act, but we need to go further than that. We need to restore public sector workers' right to strike, like we've seen teachers go on wildcat strikes, breaking the law in states across the country. But that's what's built public support, because they see who's standing up for teachers, for cafeteria workers, for bus drivers, for the kids that they care for in our school system, in our public schools. So I think the labor movement is one that the Democratic Party needs to understand. We need the labor movement, and we can't play it both ways by taking this corporate PAC money and pretending like we're still on the side of the working class. I know which side I'm on, and that's why I'm rejecting the corrupt influence of corporate PACs, and I'm standing on the side of the workers.
And that's really what the Democrats need to recognize is there's an opportunity to be the working class party. There's an opportunity to be the anti-war party. The Republicans are already assuming the positions of all of the worst policies that you can imagine. Why wouldn't we want to have an actual opposition party that stands in opposition to those principles? And the Democrats have a good opportunity to do that. I mean, we're seeing those wins across the country. New York had a fantastic night just the other week. Today, we saw some fantastic wins in Colorado, and we were just celebrating that right before you came on. Chat, if you are energized by these types of candidates, Oliver is a great person to get behind, and you have the opportunity to continue to donate. We have about 8 minutes left, I think, before this deadline is over. Please donate whatever you can, even if it's just something like $5. You really can make a difference. I don't want to take away the air from what you were saying. When you mentioned that you were working for the federal minimum wage, it blows my mind that in some states you can work at somewhere like Chipotle, where a burrito literally costs $10 and an hour of your work is worth $7.25. That's fucking absurd. I don't understand how that is still something that is normalized in areas of the country. How do you think that you'd be able to push in a new minimum wage that we could guarantee for workers?
Yeah, we had a massive virtual rally last night, and one of the speakers on that rally was the leader of One Fair Wage, Saru. And I actually had the opportunity to meet with Saru Jayaraman and other One Fair Wage staff. And what we have the opportunity with these DSA candidates that are being elected, and shout out Malat Kiros, another federally endorsed DSA candidate like myself, Claire Valdez, a former UAW union organizer in New York City. And this labor movement is really central to I think the amazing candidates that we're seeing across the board. We've seen the House Freedom Caucus on the right understand how power works in Congress, and I have disagreements with pretty much everything that they do, but they understand that
you have a lot of them that are in Florida, right? Aren't a majority of them from Florida?
Yeah, unfortunately, Matt Gaetz on the other side of the state in the Panhandle was the one that was holding up the speakership for Kevin McCarthy and humiliating him through 15 different votes.
How many times was it? 14 times that he got denied or something?
Yeah, on the 15th time it worked. But I think that's what we need to consider on the left, is the fact that we see these incredibly narrow margins in the House of Representatives. It could be 4 or 5 members, one way or another, Democrats or Republicans, and God willing, we take back the House of Representatives in November. But when we do, come next January, we got to be able to use that leverage. When it's time to elect a Speaker of the House, we have to be able to extract some real material concessions for the working class. One Fair Wage and Senator Chris Murphy just introduced the Raise the Wage Act to $25 an hour. Jared Moskowitz isn't even on the Raise the Wage Act to $17 an hour. He's not even a co-sponsor. 4 out of every 5 Democrats is, but we still have these corporate Democrats that are being challenged in races all across the country, like we are right here in South Florida in the 25th district. And I think it's about being willing to use our leverage and being willing to have some sharp elbows. We're not going up there to make friends. We're going up there to represent the communities that are sending us there. And the community in South Florida is hurting right now. I've been on the picket line with Starbucks workers, striking Starbucks Workers United members in West Palm Beach. $16 an hour is not enough. And that's, more than double what the federal minimum wage is right now. It is unconscionable that, how many burritos can a Chipotle worker make in the space of an hour when they're getting $7.25 an hour? I mean, the value that is being produced, it is wage theft. It is, these corporations, these retail giants, these fast food giants, they can more than afford a $25 an hour minimum wage. And we need to index it to inflation and, not have these loopholes, this, sub-minimum tipped wage, loopholes for incarcerated workers, for ADA workers, for minors, like they're trying to carve out in the state of Florida legislature where they've got Republican supermajority. So before I get wound up any further, we've got like 3 minutes left, 4 minutes left. So hit the donation link in the chat. If you come after midnight, it's still okay. We are using every single dollar and dime, to communicate with voters, because we are 7 weeks out today from our August 18th primary. So every little bit matters.
And that is such a close date that's coming up. It might sound far away for you in chat, but that's going to come so quick. I mean, we were anticipating all of the elections that we've seen for so long, and those have already passed. We know that it's coming up. We have a lot of incredible fighters that are running that day, Oliver included. And yeah, like you said, we only have a couple minutes left before the deadline. Y'all should really donate if you want someone who's a fighter, who's actually going to push for hope in a better system instead of just opposition against those that we already know are corrupt. It's a very low bar to say that Donald Trump is ruining the country right now. It's very hard, it seems, for Democrats to actually present a vision for the future. I've seen some of your platform where you've said your top three priorities are that minimum wage increase, Medicare for all, and climate resiliency. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment of your three biggest priorities, or is there something I'm missing there?
Yeah, those are three of the most important priorities. I mean, in a coastal community like we are here in South Florida, the climate is central to the long-term survival of our community. I mean, we have flooding on sunny days, the sea level rise, and extreme weather instances like hurricanes. I mean, it's what's driving the cost of housing up. We have property insurance rates that are doubling. We've seen more than a dozen private insurers leave the state of Florida because they get completely liquidated. They get wiped out when these storms come through. They don't even have the funds to pay out the claims of the multi-billion-dollar damage that this extreme weather that's exacerbated by man-made climate change causes. So Medicare for all, when the top two spenders of congressional lobbying are the private health insurance industry and big pharma, that is an indicator that if you are standing up for Medicare for all, that means you're going to fight no matter how big the opponent is. And I think it's a litmus test for standing up against AIPAC, standing up against genocide and apartheid. It's standing up against the corrupt influence of corporate money. And then, the $25 an hour minimum wage, it's just so central to my story, because working on that hot grill and hearing that someone thought that I deserved more than double what I was making at the time. I mean, that's the fight that was missing from the Democratic Party in 2024. You remember Biden was elected in 2020, campaigning hard for $15 an hour. He said, you send me these two senators from Georgia the day before January 6th, when John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were elected the first time. It wasn't until Kirsten Sinema gave the thumbs down that, Democrats lost a fight and they're like, I guess we can't keep fighting. No, if you lose, if you get knocked down, you got to replace these corrupt corporate Democrats and get someone else in there that's going to keep fighting, not just pretend like the American people are going to forget. That's why Democrats lost 7 million votes in 2024 relative to what they had in 2020. So I think those three policies are really central to, so much of what the Democratic Party needs to do.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think it's very reflective of where the electorate is as well. Most polls are showing that Democrat voters are dissatisfied and disappointed with the current Democratic Party. They want change. Voters want change. And we're seeing that from New York to Colorado and hopefully eventually Florida. Do you see a lot of these DSA wins as like a coordinated strategy? Or do you think that each race really requires its own localized fights? What would you say as far as why we're seeing so many DSA wins?
I mean, I think it's some column A and some column B. I think nationally there is a desire for a different kind of politics, and that's what the Democratic Socialists of America represent. I mean, that's why I've considered myself to be a Democratic Socialist for over a decade. When I started volunteering for the Sanders campaign and got on staff in 2015, but also when I formally became a dues-paying member of DSA in 2020, in the midst of a once-in-a-century pandemic, when we had a racial uprising for an uprising for racial justice all across the country against police brutality and police violence. I saw a Democratic Party that wasn't willing to, fight for Medicare for all when we're all going through this collective healthcare experience, when, they're doing performative stuff instead of, attacking the problem of a militarized police system that, we now see expanding into ICE, into, violating our constitutional and civil rights. So I really think that DSA was central to that, and that's why it's over 100,000 members strong nationwide. But I think what's so important is the local autonomy of the organizing culture that DSA brings, that, has this practical application of our overarching philosophy of, bringing democracy not just from the ballot box, but also into the workplace and into every other aspect of life. But this is a movement that at its core is being driven by members, just like we have here in our Broward DSA and Miami DSA and Palm Beach Treasure Coast DSA, even our comrades in Orlando and Tampa and Pinellas County that have come down here and knocked on doors with us. I think this is, the power of this movement is that it's a unifying ideology that has a practical application no matter where you go in the country, but it is locally led, and it is that agency that it's not a top down strategy. It's really organizing focused. And for myself, coming into politics as an organizer, as a grassroots organizer, and then organizing a union, I think this is, central to, we shouldn't have a politics that's driven by consultants and think tanks that are churning out white papers that, don't have any real connection to what people on the ground are experiencing. And, the only way that we can make that connection is when we're going door to door, when we're phone banking, when we're out in the community and hearing from people. And I think that's really the strength of the movement, and why, I'm not trying to hedge, but I think it is, a little bit of both. And I think it's the best of both worlds.
To speak specifically about some of your localized challenges, I mean, Florida is a place that has a long history of villainizing terms like socialism or even democratic socialism. How do you think you're going to break through that narrative and actually address the needs of affordability that every Floridian is going through, especially working class Floridians? Do you have a particular strategy in order to combat a lot of that misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, capitalism's not that popular right now. We've got such severe income and wealth inequality. The economy is so hard for so many people. And, in South Florida, the visible manifestation of income and wealth inequality is there. We've got folks that are working full time that are still sleeping in their cars, and we have, the parking lot for the yachts of Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. So it's unavoidable to see the contradictions in the current economic system. And I think, for so many communities that, make South Florida home, whether they're coming to the United States from countries where they had quote unquote socialism. I think what most people are actually fearful of is authoritarianism, and that's what Donald Trump represents: the attacks on political rights, on, civil and constitutional rights, on freedom of speech, on freedom of expression. That's what Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are doing. When DeSantis is signing legislation that you can run over a protester that's blocking the street with your car if you feel like they're getting in the way. I mean, when we were marching for racial justice after the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, we were marching in the streets, and they want to take that right to protest away from us, and give license for people like Kyle Rittenhouse to do what he did on the streets of Kenosha, Wisconsin.
If I'm not mistaken, didn't Ron DeSantis green light like driving through protesters in Florida or something like that? Insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, what people are really fearful of, it's not Medicare for all. It's not a $25 minimum wage. They're afraid of ICE going door to door and, taking their neighbors away. They're afraid of, their kids going to school and maybe mom or dad isn't home when they get home because, ICE picked them up and took them to a privately run detention center, somewhere out in the Everglades or elsewhere. I think people, the fear mongering about socialism just doesn't land when we see, real authoritarianism in this country right now. And I think, too often we get caught up in the left right political spectrum that we miss out that there's a top or bottom, up strategy. And the top down strategy is the one that's putting its thumb on the, putting its boot on the neck of the working class. And I think that's something where, for anyone, whether you were born here, you came to this country, we can all understand that, democratic socialism and trying to give people economic rights, this is connected to FDR's fight. I mean, they called Franklin Roosevelt a socialist. They called Teddy Roosevelt a socialist when they were trying to implement, child labor law protections and, bust the trusts of the railroads and, the big corporate monopolies that we see again today. These corporations, these corporate mergers that, are buying each other out for billions of dollars and then laying off en masse thousands of workers. Who is this benefiting? There are not very many actual capitalists in this country. There are very few people that actually own capital. Most of us work for a living. Most of us work for a wage or a salary. And I think once people make that connection, the fear mongering, it doesn't really sink in. It definitely comes up, but it's more often than not people asking me how I'm going to respond to it than it is, voters actually questioning my ideology. I think most people share these priorities.
Yeah, I think being policy driven is the best way to cut through that. And it seems like a lot of DSA are doing that and being successful across the country. And I'm glad your campaign is so focused on policy. I know it's late for you over there, but I'd love to take just about like 10 more minutes. I have a couple questions. Before I get into those, though, it looks like we hit the goal, which is fantastic. So awesome job,
Yes.
chat, to everybody who helped make that happen. Fantastic. It looks like Oliver raised $212,000, 971. That's fantastic this quarter. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at our total contributions for the last 3 months, and it's 6699 right now, which is pretty nice.
Incredible. Wow. But that's really amazing. Awesome job. I wanted to talk to you. I've been interviewing a lot of people. We just talked to Abdul El Sayed last week. So been able to have the honor of speaking with a lot of amazing progressive leaders that I think are the future of this country. Who do you think is going to be? There's a lot of people coming into the next Congress who are very inspiring and are very policy driven, specifically on a workers' rights agenda. But if you had to narrow it down, who is your number one ally that you'd be excited to work with in the House?
Oh man, I don't want to shade anyone that I don't mention. But gosh, just because I've had the opportunity to meet him in person last week in DC, Chris Rabb, the very first federally endorsed Democratic Socialist candidate to be elected in the city of Philadelphia, I was really glad to meet him. He's a very kind person. We were there for an event with the Progressive Change Campaign Committee, which has endorsed both of our campaigns. And I was running around. I had a meeting right before this event started, so I got there a little late, and the organizers just sat me down at a table with Chris Rabb, and I said, "I'm sorry for crashing your table," and he said, "No, it's your table too." And I think that kind of humility, and I would extend that to. I posted on the night of the New York primaries a screenshot of a text that I got from a friend in New York City last November that said, "My amazing friend Daria Lisa is running for Congress," and I posted that, and it went absolutely bonkers. But I think this is just we're a community of people. Chris Rabb has a family history of abolition and struggle for racial justice that has come across so powerfully. I've done a number of panels with him, joint interviews, and he's just someone who really has courage and has I think in a context where Claire and Daria Lisa and Melat and so many others like myself, although I do have a little bit of gray in my beard, still a pretty young person. Chris Rabb is someone who is.
I think anyone under the age of 60 is young in Congress, if I'm gonna be honest.
And Chris Rabb has served for many years in the Pennsylvania state legislature, and I think having that institutional knowledge, but also having the courage to run unabashedly on democratic socialist principles is something that I'm looking forward to. Even though we're both going to be freshmen, I think the opportunity to learn from someone who's worked in a legislative body, in the state of Pennsylvania with some very tight margins. I mean, we're not talking about a state with supermajorities. It's a deep blue district, but in a very competitive state. And I think that level of pragmatism is something that I'm looking forward to learning a lot from. But I want to give everybody their flowers. But those are a few of the candidates that I'm really looking forward to serving alongside once we win this primary and once we win this general election.
100%. I think we have amazing fighters that are all going to rally together. It is a collective movement. No individual representative can do it alone. And I'm excited to see so many faces that represent the working class instead of just the donor class and the consultants that have run the Democratic Party for so long. On the flip side, who are you most angry that you're going to have to work with or see on a regular basis in the House?
If you saw my recent video confronting Randy Fine while I was in Washington, D.C. for that event, I was shooting some content around Capitol Hill. I just kept running into my least favorite Floridians. I saw Rick Scott when I was there. Elijah Manley and I chased him down and asked him why he was cutting healthcare when he defrauded the Medicare system, perpetrating the largest Medicare fraud in U.S. history. And I asked Randy Fine about a particular instance. There was a young boy from Florida, Muhammad Ibrahim, Palestinian American, United States citizen, Florida resident. He was visiting his family in the West Bank. I believe this was about a year and a half ago, last February, and he was kidnapped by the IDF from his family's home in the middle of the night. There's a two-tiered system of justice in the West Bank, which has been under illegal occupation by the IDF since 1967. If you're an Israeli settler, you live under Israeli civil law. If you're a Palestinian indigenous to the land, you live under the IDF's military law, and those military courts, they have conviction rates of like something like 97, 98%. I mean, it is a Jim Crow system, and we call it an apartheid. But Senator Nina Turner, one of my great mentors and someone who I've gone to for counsel so often on this campaign, she reminded us that before this was, the kind of Nazi ideology, who did the Nazis learn from? They learned from the Confederates in the deep South of the United States of America with the chattel slavery system. And while there's not chattel slavery in Palestine today, what there is a two-tiered system of justice that kept Muhammad incarcerated for 10 months. He turned 16 years old while he was incarcerated in an Israeli prison. His cousin, Saifullah Musalet, another Florida resident, United States citizen, 20 years old, worked in his family's ice cream shop in the Tampa Bay area. He was beaten to death by Israeli settlers, and they surrounded his body and blocked an ambulance from coming to administer aid. His life could have been saved even after that horrific, violent assault, but he was murdered, and Muhammad was locked away and didn't even know. He turned 16 years old in military prison, lost between a third and a quarter of his body weight, contracted scabies. And when I asked Randy Fine about this, and one of my organizations that has endorsed me is CARE Action Florida, the Council for American Islamic Relations, and CARE on their advocacy side, on the C3 side, they were relentless in advocating to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, to secure Muhammad's release, as well as the hundreds. It's not just Muhammad. He has become a poster child of something that is much larger and traumatic for hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent children and Palestinians suffering in detention. But I asked Randy Fine what he had to say to the Ibrahim family, and he said, "You lost my interest in your question." And I'm going to have to deal with my own feelings of being able to work with these people, because I think it is just so grotesque and inhumane that sometimes when I see them on the television screen, I want to leap through the screen and shake them by the shoulders. But I'm going to need to be able to work with them, and so that's what I'm committed to do. Working with respect and trying to build bridges where I can. But God, with some of these people, man, it's going to be really hard because they don't see the humanity in everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine seeing them on a regular basis, but somebody that will be inspiring on the other end. I mean, Malat was fired from her law firm before she just won her congressional race for publicly defending pro-Palestinian student protesters. And it really did become a defining moment of her campaign. Do you see a through line between stories like hers and the coalition that you're trying to build in Florida?
Yeah, and I think the reason why this is so resonant here is that for a very long time, the AIPAC line has been that Palestinian rights and self-determination is a third rail in American politics, but especially in South Florida. And what we're seeing is that is not the case. That there are universal human rights and human values that, no matter our race, religion, or background, most people respect and uphold, and want to see a government where we are proud of what our taxpayer dollars are going towards. And right now, we are disgusted and horrified by seeing, not only what our taxpayer dollars are contributing towards in Palestine with our unconditional military support for Israel, but going to war ourselves, an illegal war that Donald Trump has dragged us into, that unfortunately my opponent Jared Moskowitz rubber stamped when Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie introduced our bipartisan Iran War Powers resolution. Jared Moskowitz came out immediately and called it the Ayatollah Protection Act and gave Trump a permission slip to take us to war. By the way, Jared Moskowitz, sitting on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, bought Lockheed Martin stock on 4 separate occasions leading up to that disastrous decision. And
Just coincidence, just a coincidence.
and just happened to be a coincidence that the Monday after those illegal strikes, Lockheed Martin stock hit an all-time high on the market. So, I think there's a challenge here in not so much in organizing in South Florida, but in getting the rest of the country to understand that, too often, Philip Agnew, who was the co-founder of the Dream Defenders, which endorsed me on this virtual rally we had last night. And Philip was a senior political advisor for Bernie Sanders in 2020. The Dream Defenders were founded in response to the murder of Trayvon Martin, with George Zimmerman, being held not accountable, and spawning the Black Lives Matter movement. But Phil Agnew talked about last night how for so long Florida has been a punchline that's been used, to be like, there goes Florida. People there deserve what they get. They deserve what they vote for. When we're in the deep South, this is a state that is part of the legacy of the Confederacy. We are a voter suppressed state. We are a state that, people do not have the equal ability, as we've seen with the recent round of redistricting, to just exercise our voice at the ballot. I was proud to be part of the campaign in 2018 to pass voting rights restoration to over 1 million Floridians with Amendment 4. What did the state of Florida do when Floridians, over 60% of us, Republican, Democrat, Independent, said we want to restore voting rights when people have paid their debt from to society and they come back from incarceration and return as citizens? The state of Florida put up a poll tax. And then in 2020, they made political propaganda videos when people who didn't know that they had outstanding debt and court fees tried to show up to vote, and they would send the sheriff's office to go arrest them and release the police body camera footage, as if to say, don't you dare try to exercise your voting rights. If you believe that you're one of the million that had your rights restored, think again. And I think that is the challenge in Florida, is getting people to understand that we are a working class state. As Mayor Mamdani said, there is one majority wherever you go in the United States of America, and it is the working class. But the working class in Florida is struggling. We are suffering under the thumb, under the boot of these Republican fascists. So I think that's been a major challenge. But I think what's been so galvanizing about our campaign, Jared Moskowitz isn't out here knocking on doors. What's he going to talk about? That he's the only Democrat that voted for the Laken Riley Act, or was the first Democrat to join Doge, or brag about his multiple appointments by Ron DeSantis? We're in a closed primary state. We're talking to Democratic voters. We have these conversations, and within 15 seconds, they're ready to look for something different. And, even before that, people are just gravitating towards the no corporate PAC money, the Medicare for all, the $25 minimum wage, and standing up to militarism and endless war. And, I think that is what's galvanizing here. And I think the country is starting to see, as more and more of these DSA candidates win, that it's not just New York City. It's not just Philadelphia. It's Denver. It's DSA candidates winning down the ballot in states like Georgia and Kentucky. I'm very proud to have the support of St. Petersburg City Councilor and the first Democratic Socialist elected in Florida in 100 years, Richie Floyd, over in the Gulf Coast. It is possible here too, and it must be possible if we're going to bend the arc of this country, towards one that is more rooted in racial, social, economic, and environmental justice.
I couldn't agree with you more on virtually everything that you just said. One big highlight that I think is important to emphasize: I'm streaming from California, but we have people all over the country that tune in to watch this stream. But I think that there's this attitude generally, and typically you see it around like suburban, coastal Democrats, that kind of what you echoed earlier. People in the South deserve what they vote for. Let them, let's secede from them. Let's let them go. There are so many working class people. There are marginalized people who live in the South. I know the last figure that I saw was over 1 million queer people live in the southern states. And the fact that some Democrats are willing to say, like, yeah, those people don't matter because the states typically vote red or they have super majorities. Exactly what you just said. A lot of times there's voter suppression that happens in these states, and we can't just outcast or throw those people away. Their lives matter just as much. And another thing that I think is really important is the organizing in the South is much more productive and much more supportive of each other than even organizing that I see in a blue state like California. I think that there's this notion of everybody's progressive in a place like Los Angeles, where you don't see as much organizing as you do in somewhere like Kansas City in Missouri, or you see in South Florida. Like the labor building and the unionizing that happens because people know that they are going to be abused by the Republican supermajorities in the legislature, it is so much more powerful. And I think that it builds this huge narrative for change to happen. So I just wanted to say that to dispel any of the people who doubt that a DSA candidate can win in somewhere like red Florida under Ron DeSantis. I absolutely believe that the energy is there and it's possible. And I'm just really excited to see your campaign. Before you take off, I know that it's past midnight for you. I don't want to keep you too long, but you're an incredible speaker. I think that you have fantastic communication skills, and a lot of people got a majority of your message today. What would you say as final words to people who might not know about your campaign and what you stand for? And then go ahead and end with how can people get involved if they want to help the campaign even further?
Yeah, and before I do that, because you mentioned Kansas City, I got to shout out my fellow DSA comrade, Brother Hartzell Gray, a former tenant organizer in the Kansas City, Missouri area. He's running for Congress right now to prove that this movement is capable of winning in deep red districts. But for our campaign, what this is really about is restoring the working class roots of the Democratic Party and standing up against the corrupt influence of corporate PACs. It's fighting for Medicare for all. It's fighting for $25 an hour. It's fighting for a Green New Deal, universal child care, paid family and medical leave, ending this U.S. militarism abroad so that we can invest our taxpayer dollars at home and believe that it is possible. We are building our support every single day, and we're building an organizing culture that is going to sustain itself and is going to, go beyond just electoralism to, support workers organizing unions in their workplace. It's going to support immigrants that need to know their rights when ICE or agents of the state are showing up at their workplaces or showing up at their homes to, make sure that the Constitution applies to everybody in this country, and we all need to know our rights. So I think that's been such an exciting part of our campaign, is knowing that it doesn't just end on August 18th or on November 3rd. This is, when we win this race, it is going to spawn, so many different campaigns, at so many different levels of office, and, so much new organizing. And I think that's what's been, giving me chills just even thinking about the possibility of really changing the narrative in a state like Florida and proving, if we win this race, that it is truly possible anywhere you go across the country. And if you want to get involved, you can go to oliverforcongress.com. You can find us on social media. Join us for a weekend canvassing shift. I go out myself. I can't tell you how many dozens of pairs of socks I've thrown out because I'm wearing holes in the soles of them, because I'm going door to door and sweating in the hot Florida sun. And these are such amazing conversations. I mean, one that I had with a mother. I told her that Congressman Moskowitz was the only Florida Democrat to vote for the Lake and Riley Act that gave ICE all this power, and that he's taken all this money from AIPAC. And her young daughter was 3 or 4 years old and playing in the doorway behind her, and she said, "I don't understand how I can be how the Democratic Party just asks me to be okay when we've got children like my daughter locked away in Dilley Detention Center in Texas, and when children like my daughter are being torn limb from limb in Palestine with my taxpayer dollars, when I can't afford childcare, when I'm worried about how she's going to grow up." So let's remind ourselves who we're doing this for. It's not just about me; it's about all of us. That is, the real thesis of this movement that we're building, is that it's Claire, it's Daria Lisa, it's Chris, it's Hartzell, it's Oliver, but it's so many more people. This campaign only goes as far as the next person that's willing to do a canvassing shift or to pick up the phone and dial their neighbor, or dial someone you may not know from all across the country in California, because you believe that change is possible in Florida too. And this federal policy, these federal offices, they affect everybody. So so grateful for you having me on, Mason. I hope people will go to the website, oliverforcongress.com, find us on social media, sign up to volunteer if you're here locally or if you're across the country and want to get involved. We need the volunteer support. We are in the final 7 weeks of this race, and we've tripled our support in the polls in the last month. Malat Kiros was at 7% like 2.5 months ago. I mean, people are so checked out of politics that, the poll numbers, they can move so quickly as soon as people understand that there's an alternative. And that's what we're here to provide. And, thank you, Mason, for giving me a platform to share so much of our campaign and, what is really possible in Florida and all across the country.
Yeah, I mean, the establishment is scared. You see the narrative shift every time there's a new win. The DSA only has two people in Congress. Well, now they only have four. Now they only have six. And it's going to continue on and on until the working class actually makes their voices heard. And I'm so excited to be talking to progressives who have that same vision that the working class shares. Last thing before you go, what would you say to people who feel apathetic about the electoral process to begin with? There's been a lot of people who have been let down by establishment Democrats in the past who no longer feel like voting is in their own interests as a working class fighter. How would you persuade them that there is hope in rebuilding from within the system and there is hope in making this radical change happen at the electoral level?
Yeah, all it takes is one. I mean, I think the most cynical views of electoralism is people who care the most about seeing this kind of change and then feel let down. But we saw Mayor Mamdani at 1% in the polls in New York City, and now look at he's breaking the consensus that government can't do things quickly or can't move in the interests of working people. So I would say if you don't believe in electoralism, just get behind a candidate that you believe in, to support a cause that you believe in. That I often say as a union organizer, Congress and elected office is but one lever of power. And when Republicans control the House and Senate and they have supermajorities in Tallahassee, the union movement is one where the working class, regardless of who is in power, can exert real influence and use their power to get real material concessions. So this doesn't have to be you only care about electoralism and you drop everything else. This is one tool in the tool belt for the working class to really affect the kind of change that we need. Because when you see just what one victory can do, it can inspire a movement all across the country and lead to dozens, hundreds of other victories. And I think that is a reason for people to believe that if it's possible somewhere, it's possible everywhere.
You heard it here first. Oliver Larkin saying build local community power, make sure that you're protecting your neighbors, whether that's through unionizing or mutual aid. And it never hurts. It is only to our benefit to have an ally in a position of power who can help make those goals achievable. Oliver, thank you so much for going on. Everybody, make sure to check out Oliver for Congress. Look that up. See if you can help by phone banking or canvassing. I think canvassing is one of the most meaningful activities you can do. You get to meet a lot of people who share your values, build lifelong friends, and you get to talk to constituents and actually give them hope that change is possible. So thank you so much. I wish you luck in the race. This won't be our last time talking. I'd love to talk with you again. And yeah, keep fighting the good fight.
I'm looking forward to it, Mason. Thanks so much. Solidarity, and thanks for everything you do.
Solidarity. Bye.